Evening, everyone. Hi, Mr. Kunda here. Thank you for joining me for this webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about ramen profitability and getting sustainable. So the reason why we're having this webinar today is because starting up in places like Zimbabwe or within these contexts where resources and funding are always an issue, they're not always readily available. It's difficult. It's very, very hard. And I would start by sort of telling you a story, my personal experience in trying to do this. You see, at Newlab, we believe that there are different types of startups. So now, I won't go into much depth with regards to that, but we have a type of startup that we call moonshot startups. So these are startups that are trying to solve a very difficult challenge, right? These are the kind of startups that when they make it in a very big way, right? They change the status quo. They literally change how things are being done, right? And so some 4 years ago, I started working on a startup like that. It was called SciSci Wireless. So we were trying to essentially change the way that wireless networks were deployed in such a way that we could provide free internet access to anybody. Literally, it was liberating the internet. That was actually our tagline. And so it involved us sort of creating our own new technology. We built technology that made Wi-Fi networks 10 times more efficient. And this happened 4 years. Now, because we were building something that was so difficult in a space that had a lot of monopolies, you had a lot of network operators that didn't want to budge, they didn't want to work with you. They weren't looking at disruption with a smile on their faces. I mean, there's no business that would, especially when it's coming from externally. And so it was difficult. So there might have been ways in which we would have been able to monetize, but then we didn't. We didn't get to any sort of revenue throughout that entire process, right? The entire period. This is 4 years. So it meant that, and also because we didn't raise any sort of capital externally or from anybody, we did try, but there were always a lot of challenges. So some had conditions to say they needed us to have licensing, which meant having to go through government entities. And back then, there were a lot of problems, right, in trying to do so. So we weren't able to raise capital from any external party, which meant that the founders, which is myself and my co-founder then, had to fund this whole process. So imagine trying to exist for 4 years, trying to build this technology, selling this dream. It essentially meant that we were being fueled and we were making progress out of passion, right? Out of our wanting to solve this whole thing, which works well for a good period, right? But a lot of issues that start coming up, right? Because you're a human being as well, so you need to survive, right? You need to eat, you need a place to live, and all of that. And mind you, we were developing new technology here, so it was complicated. We kept, burning devices, having to buy new components, and we're trying to build this, and it was really, really difficult. And so at the end, so I then left that's the startup, so to speak, and things sort of died down for quite a bit of time just before then, because it became very, very frustrating. It got worse because when we then realized that, look, we needed to actually make money to survive, we then started doing, other things to generate this revenue, which meant that we stopped focusing on the product and started focusing on these other small things that could generate enough revenue to help us sustain as human beings. Over and above the fact that there were now expectations, because we'd promised the world that we were liberating the internet, right? We were providing this free access, and I think SciSci is still going to do that. But this is sort of a lesson that I learned in trying to do that. So because we started doing all these other things, we stopped focusing on developing the product. So the startup started moving slower and slower and slower, because now our attention was split. And once you do that, naturally, we need to generate revenue. So once you start generating revenue from something other than what you started building, and once you split your focus that way, the probability of you failing for other reasons becomes higher. So other things become more attractive, and you start looking at other smaller opportunities and thinking, maybe we should go towards those and stop expending so much time and energy and effort into this one thing that internally, yes, looks like you're making some sort of progress, but in the grand scheme of things, there really isn't much progress over time. So it got very frustrating. People got depressed. People got frustrated. The team got to a point where it was breaking down, and it was a really big problem, right? And I actually wrote an entire blog post about this. Let me see if I can share that with you. So There we go. So I wrote an entire blog post about this, right? And it's basically Startup Sustainability 101, how to get ramen profitable, and I'll explain what that is. So it's not a very long article, but I would suggest and recommend that people go through this and sort of understand how I was trying to articulate certain issues through that. Right. So yeah, we're back. So I'm going to go through a few slides to explain what it is, what it means, and possibly some of the options that you might have if you want to then do that. Right. Here we go. So yeah, I'm still using PowerPoint to do this. I know there are easier ways of doing it, but the reason why we do these webinars is because we don't invest a lot of time in actually trying to set them up and stuff. It's just basically about the content and whether the viewers, get to understand this, and then we'll iterate on this whole platform a bit later. So how to build a unicorn and why you have to try. I think albeit the fact that it is difficult, the challenge is there are no resources, everyone is crying, saying there are no resources, there's no money, how do I get financing? I think it is important to try because, in doing so, you sort of realize what you can do, you sort of realize what the actual opportunity is, and it's also a learning process for first-time entrepreneurs. And a lot of people, when I started talking about us doing this webinar, they thought this is what I was talking about, right? How to make money. So there are parts of it because you do need to make money in order to be sustainable, to build an enterprise in some level of comfort, right? But being ramen profitable or ramen sustainable, it's basically living frugally, right? Using the least amount of resources possible to achieve a particular objective, right? The general definition that you'll find on the internet is that it means the startup is making just enough money to cover the founder's living expenses, right? So this is just enough to allow you to be in a place where you can actually innovate and build an entire startup. That is basically what ramen profitability is. And this might be in two ways. So it might be you getting the startup and the product that you're building onto the market, albeit the fact that it might be a version 1, it might not be working as well. It might not have all the features, and all the flowery stuff that you envisioned initially when you wanted to build it, the stuff that's in your vision. But it might involve you getting that onto the market and trying to generate a bit of revenue from selling that basic product. And that helps in your validation because it might have just one feature. And if people are willing to pay for that one feature, then you are sure you're building something that's going to be successful. It also makes it a bit easier because now you don't have to be forking out or borrowing money from friends and family just to build something that you're not sure will succeed. But this might also mean working on smaller products or smaller things or doing other activities that might be separate from the actual startup, but be done so as to generate a bit of revenue to then fund your innovation, right? And this is one of the principles that we actually built Neolab on when we started out. So Neolab had what we call the revenue engine. And so the revenue engine was basically a set of products that we developed really quickly. They were not as cool and innovative. They just had some value that we were sure somebody would be willing to pay for. And we would sell these and undertake these activities to generate enough revenue to allow us to build these startups. And now Neolab is working with about 30 different teams, and of those 30 different, about 12 of them are actually now startups. And that whole argument is based on what we firmly believe at Neolab, to say that not every idea is meant to become a product, and not every product is meant to become a startup, and not every startup makes it into becoming a business, right? So these are some of those ideas that become a product that are not scalable enough to become a startup. So there might be things that might not, they might have a lifespan of 6 months. So within 6 months, either you flood the market or there's competition or something, and so it becomes economically not so viable. But you do these things to generate just enough money for us to continue innovating and for us to continue doing what we need to do. And this is where this whole model of sustaining Neolab came from. Albeit the fact that that model is sort of changing. Now the thing is, when you look at this whole how to make money argument or conversation from a global perspective, so I was looking at a lot of infographics, and this is one of them that I found, right? So it talks about you finding a product or an idea that is popular but not yet perfect, right? So there is some opportunity, some space there, right? Or you buy one and you study it in detail. So say, how is this made? So how is this water being purified and being packaged or bottled and all of that, right? And then figure out how to improve part of it, right? So how to create some sort of value that people will be willing to pay for. Now, this entire process that I'm showing you here is more ideal for an actual startup. So you'd go from there to building a prototype and then showing this prototype to 100 people and validating it. And then you remake it and you find a co-founder and you split the equity and then you find an investor and you get where this is going, right? Now, this is a challenge within our context because, first of all, you don't have all this time. So you're looking for something that's small enough, that's basic enough that you can do to generate just enough money. So you need to understand that if you're taking the second option of finding this ramen, you're basically looking at things that do not scale, things that you can do tomorrow to start making a bit of money. So the whole issue about ramen profitability, so it was termed ramen profitability because ramen is basically, these are instant noodles as the picture is depicting there. And it was called this because, for bootstrapping founders, so people who are building things out of their own resources and they're living a very frugal lifestyle, one of the major components of their diet is, instant noodles because they're cheap, they're awfully quick to make and, all of that. So that's the reason why it was called ramen profitability. So it's living on the bare basics and just having enough to allow you to innovate and build the thing that you want to build. All right. So yeah, so it's important for you to sort of find something that is basic enough, that is simple enough to start doing, that generates a bit of capital. And this is where you have to be a bit analytical about these things. So it might be like in our example, so we were running a mobile money service called EcoCash, which was viable for probably 1.5 years, but now we're stopping that because it's no longer economically viable. So it's one of those things that we did knowing that, look, this is not what we set out in the morning to do, right? It's something that we're doing, just to make sure that we can continue innovating and continue experimenting and asking the question why and all of that. We have a good number of other products that we started doing. So we became a domain registrar. We built a hosting platform, and before we built the automated version of Neon that might be there now, we literally were doing this manually. So we'll go out there and find somebody who wants a domain name, who wants web hosting. We learned sort of how to do that. There are a lot of like reseller models that are out there that we initially adopted. Now we're running our own servers because there's stuff that we learned that there are issues with reseller plans like that. But that's how we started, right? And so we would be hosting and these websites, and would then delve into a bit of web development here and there, and this is basically how we're generating a bit of money. We did a product called Lapchecks, which is basically customizable vinyl skins that would apply to people's laptops, and so would allow you to print whatever image you want on it. And we spent about a week sort of understanding the types of vinyl that are there, who does what print quality over what time, and we packaged this into a product and we sold this to people. So you see, it's something that is very simple, that is basic, that we were doing. We knew that this in the market for Lapchecks, by the way, is now actually getting flooded from imports, I think from Botswana, right? So these are some of the things that we did to generate just enough capital to get there. Now, ideally, you're looking for something with the following characteristics: something that doesn't take a lot of time for you to develop. It doesn't take a lot of time, to run and actually generate revenue. And it's even better if it has so sort of passive recurring revenue. So something like hosting, right? So we would spend a lot of time looking for a client, but you know that once you're hosting a person's website, they're basically going to be paying you X amount of dollars every single month because they need to pay it for their website to be live, right? To be on the internet, to be available. And so we don't technically have to put in any work after that. There's a bit of support here and there, but most of that would then be done by the person who actually does the website. So you see, you'd want to look for something that has this sort of passive recurring revenue, because that way you spend, say, 3 months of your time to set this whole thing up, and then it continues generating revenue passively whilst you focus on your work. Now, and it's not easy to find something like that. Even the example that I talked about, this whole hosting, there are a lot of challenges, right? A lot of issues to do with how that can be done, and there's the support and there's the learning of the technical things. A lot of people then start looking at these. I know there are a lot of, I personally think they're Ponzi schemes of sorts, but these reseller sort of, it's not reseller, but it's it's a viral marketing kind of campaign where you sign up for a product, then you get other people to sign up, and it becomes this huge sort of trail. Some people do that. I personally wouldn't advise, because I don't see how that is very sustainable. And again, you have to constantly be doing a lot of marketing to get these people signed up into perpetuity, so to speak. So that's a challenge. Internally, we have a startup that we have been working to build, and the startup is called Neosto. So Neosto basically works on creating alternative business models for startups within Neolab, and then after that, it's going to be doing this for people externally. But it's trying to find or figure out ways to get people to find ways to help businesses get their products to the people, and using rather unconventional or not so popular as yet means. So Neosto has sort of developed reseller models for two of our startups, and I'll sort of show you the what that process looks like, right? So this is a slide from the DevShop deck. So the DevShop is basically it's a startup within Neolab that works on building websites, apps, and platforms through a process called developer syndication. So helping mint more and more developers and higher quality developers within the Neolab ecosystem. So all the websites and apps and things within Neolab are built by the DevShop. And then consequently, a lot of people external to Neolab come to us and say, hey, I want a website done. And these guys have basically built a really interesting model on how to onboard a client and how to make sure that the client gets the value that they want. So they actually do a lot of remedial work where a client goes to some short developer, gets messed up, the thing isn't delivered, and then they come to the dev shop, and the dev shop sort of fixes things. But the way that they've structured how they're getting clients, so they don't want, it's a technical sort of startup. So they don't want to spend a lot of money and time in looking for clients. So they have what they call a lead fee over here. So they say, look, for whatever job that the person might bring in, once that client actually converts, so once that client becomes a paying client. So if it's an app and saying, look, we're going to be paying $10,000 for this application. The dev shop then gives the person who has brought that job a 5% lead fee, right? So that's 5% of the total value of the invoice. And so this is something that a lot of people within Neolab also take advantage of, because you have within your own circles people that you already know that want websites done, that they want apps done, and all of that. So it doesn't take you a lot of time. It doesn't require a lot of effort for you to actually, sort of convince this person to come to the dev shop and then, be taken through this entire process. So this is one of those models that are quite interesting. And as an entrepreneur, you could look at this and say, okay, so how many of these sort of models can I sign up to? And looking at my networks and the people that I know, can I actually get clients who might want these products, and then I refer them to these startups and actually get paid for it. So this one, I'll bet the fact that it's a sort of a once-off payment, but it's an example. There's another startup, and this is the Neo that I was talking about. So this is a slide from that deck. I think this was the first version, so this was some time ago. But you see they have a reseller plan. So they have the first reseller plan 1, and then reseller plan 2. Right. So, and if you look at their hosting, so for personal hosting, so for the individuals, right, they would charge a $5 fee, right? So that's the recommended cost. So when people would come to Neon directly, Neon would charge $5. But then Neon also sort of then said, look, okay, if a reseller, so you, the entrepreneur or the founder, if you were to find somebody who wanted to host their blog or their personal website, right, and if you brought them and they would actually convert to becoming a paying customer, you, the reseller, which is you, the founder, the entrepreneur, would actually get $4 per month, I think for a period of is it 6 to 9 months? So this is 9 months of you getting $4 every single month for just referring a single client, right? And if it's a business sort of client, so it's a startup or it's a society or it's a club or it's an actual company that then comes and hosts with Neon, you would get $7 off that invoice, right, for the 6 to 9 month period. So you then sort of have the recurring passive revenue that I was talking about coming to you, and then you being able to use this to actually sustain your living, or be able to continue innovating, or paying for those basic costs that your startup incurs. So maybe it's actually hosting your own startup's website or something like that. And I think that's another different option. So half the time, some of the costs that you incur a cost to do with the startup itself. So you can actually come up with an arrangement to say, look, I need hosting in this case, right? So can I not go to a hosting company and say, hey, I can do X, Y, and Z to work for you, but in exchange, can you host my website for me for free? Right? And we've seen some people who have actually done this with Neon, and it works for them. So it helps you discount or remove some of the expenses that you would otherwise have to pay. So it lowers the cost of starting up that you would otherwise be facing. And this applies to literally anything and everything. I know of entrepreneurs who are staying so in your lower residential setup, there is the main house where the person who owns the property stay. And this is usually a cottage at the back or sort of a guest house of sorts. I know of people who are staying at the guest house and they say, look, can I stay here without paying rent? In exchange, say I'll do your general yard work on a Monday and on Friday, and then for the rest of the time they are in a position to be building their startup or doing whatever they want. So in this case, they actually putting in their physical work because they're capable to do of doing that in exchange for a place to live or whatever it is. It's same goes to restaurants. So I know guys who are great at accounting. They go and they say, look, can I help you do your accounting every single month? Help you do your returns, for taxation and things like that. And in exchange, I get a free lunch from you. And there are guys who are actually surviving this way. So it's about figuring out how you can live a more frugal lifestyle whilst you have the time and the resources that you sort of need to build the startup that you're working on. But ultimately, I think it's important to not then become comfortable because you can literally get to this point where on Monday you're doing gardening for somebody and that is paying for your accommodation for say the whole week, and then on Tuesday you're doing accounting for the previous week and that's paying for your meals for the whole weekend. You sort of get into this place where it's comfortable and you just think, look, I can actually exist just by doing this. Or finding a startup or a company that's willing to give you, one of these reseller packages that is a lot like a really good sort of return. So, for example, if you look at the margins here for Neon, you're getting almost twice as much as Neon in itself is getting per client that you bring. And so there is the tendency to then become comfortable to say, you know what, I can just continue doing this. Why should I bother myself building a startup or trying to get to point set? It's always important to focus and remember on why you started doing this and why you sort of taking the route that you're taking and doing this knowing that this is secondary to the startup that you're building, because otherwise again you lose focus and it sort of defeats the whole purpose. And then a lot of people say to me, yeah, but the thing is, you see, look at that Neon sort of model, it's not a lot of money, right? The thing is, when you're looking at this and you're trying to live a lifestyle that is frugal, that is based on this whole passive recurring revenue model, it's all about starting with what you're able to do, right? So you see the examples that I gave you. So the gardening thing is obviously not for everybody, right? For some people who are actually talented, who might actually love doing the whole, growing things and making things beautiful. So to them, it's not exactly work. It's something that they're just taking time out to do and then actually getting resources for. Others who are skilled at the whole accounting thing are able to, to give that service to a service provider who then gives them back a resource that they need. So you need to look at the skills that you have, what you are already doing, and how you can take advantage of that. So how you can monetize your God-given skills, your natural abilities to generate a bit of revenue to sustain your starting up and your innovating. So personally, I've been fortunate enough to get into the space where there are a lot of opportunities to go and speak at, so for example, conferences and things like that. And so that's the one thing that I do. And a lot of people are getting interested in the whole, what is a startup? How can businesses benefit from working with startups? And is there a space where corporates and startups exist and all of that? And so I actually get a lot of opportunities to go and talk about these things and actually get paid for doing that. And so for me, it's not work. I don't have to sit down and sort of come up with a presentation. I don't take 20 hours to do that. It's something that is second nature to me. So I then take that, package that into some sort of value that a conference operator or a venue operator might be interested in, and then be able to actually get paid for doing that. And that sort of helps me sustain the lifestyle that I want to have as an entrepreneur, or whatever sort of startup process that I might be going through at that moment in time. And so, this is one of those, things that has really helped us become successful without having to go around looking for resources. And I think it's one thing that actually shocks a lot of investors, because the startups that we work with who understand this whole ramen sustainability and profitability, they expect these startups to be desperate for funding, right? And all panicky because they need resources. When in actual fact, our startups within our community now understand that, look, we can continue growing. It might not be as fast as we want, but we can continue growing using the little revenue that we're generating from other things. And then from there, then take that growth, and then sort of go and raise capital later on. So they're not in a rush to get $100,000 or $500,000. And so that's the one thing that I think is a benefit. So it helps you slow down your needing to get other people on board very quickly, because you have a bit of leg room to sort of figure out what you want to build and where the real value is in this whole thing. So yeah, so just remember that it's important that you start small. So you see in this sort of illustration, this guy is saying, "I'm so glad we nailed that first one," right? So it starts with $100, which will lead to $300, which leads to the $500, which leads to the $900, and it continues going that way, right? But it always has to start somewhere. So look at the skills that you have, the abilities that you have, and figure out how you can package this for for somebody that might be interested in that value. And sometimes, and this is interesting. So I'm not saying then stop helping people. Sometimes the actual act of just providing that service for no cost or for no requested cost in the beginning actually gets you access to the resources that you need. So I have a friend who was doing this whole bookkeeping for a company, right? And so one day the business owner then asked, so so what's wrong? He said, you're stressed. And he told him the problem. And funny enough, he then was given the place to stay, so the cottage that I was talking about. And so he stays there, he's able to build his startup. And all of a sudden, he no longer has the whole the whole accommodation cost to take care of. Guys who go and work at internet cafes, for example. So they work at the cafe for 5 hours, offering support because they have the technical skill. And in exchange, they are allowed to use the back office, to build the startup, so they can meet people there. They have free internet access. They have access to their servers and all of that. So look at how you can leverage on the relationships that you have, the networks that you have, and the abilities that you've been, given to sort of figure out how to generate a bit of revenue right now. Everybody talks about this whole, I need to go get a job and then get a job first so that I make the money and then I save for 5 years and then start up. That's a very safe model, and it's a model that works as well. But you see, ideas are not valid into the infinite end of time, right? They have a time sort of sensitive nature around them. So when you're trying to take advantage of an opportunity, you're trying to take advantage of something that you've noticed, it's not always going to be there. The market will change, trends will change, and then if you don't start working on that innovation, on that idea right now, it will become invalid, or it might be just that you're 6 months ahead of the innovation curve. And so 6 months into the future, somebody else is going to build exactly what you wanted to build. And I know we know people who are always like, that thing that I saw on TV that time, Airbnb or Facebook, whatever it is, I actually had that idea, and I feel like I told somebody and they stole the idea. Look, it's not like that, right? There is nothing new under the sun. So whatever events that you've gone through in your life that made you then realize this opportunity, surely there's somebody else that has gone through the exact same experience and is seeing that opportunity. So you need to start innovating now. And innovation comes at a cost, right? And so you need to figure out how to generate enough of that revenue to get to that point where you can continue building this thing comfortably, right? So I'm going to end this sort of conversation with this last slide, right? I know in the previous webinar we were talking about the vision and defining what success is, right? But here's the honest truth. So a lot of people think that success is, I have this idea, I'm just going to do A, B, C, D, E, and I'm going to just get there. Straightforward, it's clear, it's basic like that. But in actual fact, it's like what is illustrated to the right of this image, right? Where you go around in circles, and it actually seems like you're back, to where you started, or you're back to where you have been at some point in time. And because success is like this, you need to have a sort of a passive plan that helps sustain you as an individual all through these circles of trying to build something that is of value in society. And that's the reason why this whole ramen profitability is important. You need to think about it as you begin to start up, because not all of us are blessed to have infinite resources from guardians or founders or from a VC that you then meet, who just gives you enough money to sort of just play around with things until you're tired, until you find something that works. A good number of us have to do this on stringent budgets, on hard to access resources, and half the time it seems as though things are just not going to happen. So it's always important to figure out how you're going to make that $200 or $300 a month that you need to actually build your startup, and not then be living underneath a bridge whilst building your startup. So I hope this was helpful. Again, what we'll do is we'll sort of have other activities within the community. So there will be hives to talk about this profitability. And I understand one of the communities within NeoLab, I think it's called the Founders Club. It's actually called the Founders Fight Club. I'm not sure why. But they're actually doing activities with founders, where they're getting founders in groups and sort of doing activities to say, let's do X, Y, and Z, and figure out which group makes the most amount of money, or comes up with the best way of raising money, or by selling or whatever it is. But they are undertaking these activities to help people start thinking about, how to generate a bit of capital, albeit the fact that these people are founders in themselves. So they're each trying to build their own startups. So that's also going to be happening within the NeoLab community, which is exciting. But yeah, let's always think about how to find this place where we generate just enough to be able to grow the beautiful, brilliant, and amazing idea that we have, and actually turn this into a product without killing ourselves in the process. I hope this was beneficial, and I look forward to sort of the conversations that we're going to have going forward. Thank you, guys.